The frozen air crackled with tension on that bitter December morning. Steam rose from hundreds of exhaled breaths as soldiers watched four figures emerge from the white wilderness. December the 22nd, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The clock showed 11:30 a.m. when Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard first spotted them through his field glasses. German officers moved steadily through the deep snow. Their polished boots crunched against the frozen ground. Each step left dark impressions in the pristine white surface. Behind them stretched the devastated landscape of war. Shattered trees stood like broken teeth against the gray sky. Shell craters dotted the terrain like pock marks on diseased skin. The white flag they carried snapped in the bitter wind. It stood out starkly against the background of destruction. This piece of cloth would carry words that echoed through the corridors of history, an ultimatum wrapped in arrogant certainty. The message they brought pulsed with German confidence. The fortune of war is changing. Those words hung heavy with meaning. This time, the USA forces in and near Bastogne have been encircled by strong German armored units. The statement continued with calculated precision, each phrase designed to crush American morale. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation. The German officers who delivered these words stood with rigid military bearing. Their faces showed no doubt about the outcome. They waited with supreme confidence born of superior numbers. Their confidence had solid foundations in brutal mathematics. 18,000 Americans sat trapped inside an ever-tightening noose. Surrounding them pressed 30,000 German troops. Hundreds of tanks pointed their barrels toward the American perimeter. Supplies could not penetrate the German ring of steel. The weather had become Germany's most powerful ally. Thick clouds blanketed the sky like a gray shroud. Not a single Allied aircraft could take to the air. The nearest American relief forces sat more than 100 miles away through hostile territory. What those confident German officers could not know changed everything. 130 miles south of their position, a promise was taking shape. General George S. Patton had just made a commitment so audacious that even Supreme Commander Eisenhower questioned his sanity. This promise would demand moving an entire army through impossible winter conditions. No military force in history had ever attempted such speed under such circumstances. The mathematics of warfare were about to be rewritten completely. Not through superior firepower or better equipment. The collision between German overconfidence and American determination would reshape the battlefield. One general's refusal to accept the word impossible would change the course of history. The transformation had begun 6 days earlier in darkness so complete, it seemed solid. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest held its breath in the pre-dawn hours. At precisely 5:30 a.m., hell erupted across an 80-mile front. 1,600 German artillery pieces spoke simultaneously. Their voices created a symphony of destruction that hadn't been heard since 1940. Shells screamed through the frozen air toward unsuspecting American positions. The sound was like the world tearing itself apart. Among the Americans caught in this maelstrom stood Private First Class Robert Leckie of the 99th Infantry Division. His diary would later capture the moment with vivid clarity. The earth shook beneath us. Every bone in our bodies rattled with each explosion. Trees exploded into splinters that flew like deadly arrows. The very air seemed to scream in agony. We had been told the Germans were finished. We had been told completely wrong. This was Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. Hitler's final desperate gamble to reverse the tide that was drowning his Reich. In absolute secrecy, the Wehrmacht had assembled a force that defied belief. 410,000 troops had been concentrated in the dense Eifel forests. 1,400 tanks and assault guns sat hidden beneath camouflage nets. 2,600 artillery pieces waited in carefully prepared positions. Moving this massive force had required extraordinary measures. Everything moved under cover of darkness. Radio silence was absolute. Even the slightest electronic emission could betray their presence. Horses pulled supply wagons to eliminate engine noise. Men marched on paths covered with straw to muffle footsteps. General Major Heinz Kokott commanded the 26th Volksgrenadier Division. His written account captured the tension of those final moments before the attack. The soldiers stood silent in the darkness. Their breath formed frozen clouds before their faces like morning mist. Every man knew what was at stake. This was not just another offensive. This was our last chance to change the course of the war. The target had been chosen with surgical precision. 4 American divisions spread thin across difficult terrain. Many units contained men new to combat. Others held veterans recuperating from earlier battles. The Germans achieved complete tactical surprise across the entire front. Within hours, entire American units were either overrun or retreating in complete chaos. Roads became clogged with vehicles fleeing eastward. Equipment was abandoned in the rush to escape. Men threw away weapons and helmets to run faster. But the German plan contained one critical weakness. Speed was everything. They needed to capture the vital road junction at Bastogne within 48 hours. 7 major roads converged at this small Belgian town. Roads that German tanks needed desperately to reach their ultimate objective. The port of Antwerp lay 125 miles beyond Bastogne. Without Bastogne, the entire offensive would grind to a halt. The town sat like a cork in a bottle. Control these crossroads and the German spearheads could race toward Antwerp. Lose Bastogne, and the offensive would die. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz commanded the 47th Panzer Corps. His mission was to take Bastogne quickly and completely. The force under his command was truly formidable. The elite 2nd Panzer Division brought 88 tanks and assault guns. The veteran Panzer Lehr Division contributed 57 tanks. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division added 17,000 infantry. Racing toward the same objective from the opposite direction came salvation in olive-drab uniforms. The 101st Airborne Division. The Screaming Eagles had been resting in Reims, France. 72 days of combat in Holland had left them exhausted. Men were catching up on sleep and writing letters home. The call came like a thunderbolt. No winter clothing would be available. No time existed for proper preparation. Just grab your weapons and climb onto the trucks. The temperature had already dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit when the first convoy began rolling through the darkness toward Bastogne. Private Donald Burgett of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment would never forget that journey. His memory preserved every detail of that desperate race against time. We passed endless columns of American troops heading the opposite direction. These men were retreating in disorder. Some had no weapons left to carry. Many had lost their helmets in the chaos. They shouted warnings at us through the darkness. "Go back!" they screamed. "Go back, or they'll kill you all." One soldier with eyes wide with terror grabbed my arm with desperate strength. "There's thousands of them," he whispered. "Tigers, panthers, everything you can imagine." I pushed him away with disgust. We weren't going back anywhere. The convoy stretched for miles through the French countryside. 380 trucks carried the division through the night. Headlights were blacked out to avoid German aircraft. Drivers navigated by feel and instinct. They had no clear idea what awaited them at their destination. Maps were scarce and mostly outdated. Intelligence reports contradicted each other completely. All they knew with certainty was reaching Bastogne before the Germans. Everything else would be figured out upon arrival. The 101st Airborne Division rolled toward destiny with specific numerical strength. 805 officers and 11,035 enlisted men. Total strength reached 11,840 souls. This included 4 infantry regiments with proud battle histories. The 501st, 502nd, and 506th Parachute Infantry Regiments, plus the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. 4 artillery battalions provided fire support. Various other support units completed the division. Leading elements of the 501st PIR reached Bastogne at 11:30 p.m. on December 18th. They had beaten the main German force by mere hours. The margin of victory could be measured in minutes rather than days. Team Desaubry had already arrived ahead of the paratroopers. This combat team from the 10th Armored Division was commanded by Major William Desaubry. They had established a roadblock at Neuville 3 miles north of Bastogne. This small force would face the German spearhead alone. Dawn on December 19th brought first contact with the enemy. Sergeant William McCloskey commanded a tank in Team Desaubry. His account of the initial encounter revealed the desperate nature of the fighting. The fog was so thick, visibility dropped to 50 yards. Then we heard them approaching. The deep rumble of German armor moving through the mist. When the first Panther tank emerged from the fog, it looked like a mechanical monster. Our 75mm rounds bounced off its front armor like ping-pong balls hitting a brick wall. We had to let them get dangerously close. Only side shots had any chance of penetration. The battle for Neuville raged throughout the entire day. Team Desaubry fielded just 15 Sherman tanks against the entire 2nd Panzer Division. They held their positions for 48 critical hours. 31 German tanks were destroyed before the order came to withdraw. Major Desaubry was severely wounded when a German shell made a direct hit on his command post. Shrapnel tore through his body, but his sacrifice had bought precious time. Time that allowed the 101st Airborne to establish defensive positions around Bastogne. December 20th brought a new commander to the embattled town. Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe arrived to take temporary command of the 101st Airborne. Division Commander Maxwell Taylor was in Washington attending conferences. McAuliffe was an artillery officer by training and temperament. His calm demeanor under extreme pressure was legendary throughout the Army. He would need every ounce of that legendary composure in the coming days. The situation map in McAuliffe's makeshift headquarters painted a grim picture. German forces were closing in from 3 separate directions simultaneously. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division was infiltrating from the south and east. Panzer Lehr pushed hard from the eastern approaches. Elements of the 2nd Panzer Division threatened from the north. By noon on December 20th, the trap had snapped completely shut. The last road into Bastogne was the highway to Neufchâteau. German tanks cut this lifeline at precisely 1200 hours. No supplies could reach the defenders. No reinforcements could arrive. No wounded could be evacuated. Captain Richard Winters commanded Easy Company of the 506th PIR. He positioned his men in foxholes along the shrinking perimeter. We could hear German tanks moving in the darkness beyond our lines. The sound was like mechanical predators stalking their prey. Men were digging their foxholes deeper into the frozen ground. They used helmets and bare hands when entrenching tools broke against the iron-hard earth. The temperature had dropped near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Men's feet were already turning black from frostbite. Toes became numb, then painful, then completely without feeling. Many soldiers would lose digits to the brutal cold. Inside Bastogne itself, the civilian population of 3,000 huddled in cellars and basements. German artillery had begun systematically destroying the town building by building. Each shell created fresh rubble and new places for snipers to hide. Renée Lemaire worked as a 30-year-old Belgian nurse in the aid station on Rue de Neufchâteau. She cared tirelessly for both American and German wounded without discrimination. Her compassion knew no nationality or uniform. She would not survive the coming siege. The defenders of Bastogne now numbered approximately 18,000 men total. The 101st Airborne Division contributed its full strength of 11,840 personnel. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division operated under Colonel William Roberts. This unit fielded approximately 40 operational tanks and 2,800 men. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion brought their M18 Hellcats with high-velocity guns. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion added their expertise with the guns. Various other artillery and support units completed the defensive force. 18,000 Americans against 30,000 Germans. The mathematics were brutally simple. December 21st dawned with visibility less than 100 yards in any direction. Thick fog mixed with falling snow created a white shroud over the battlefield. Movement became nearly impossible without careful navigation. The U.S. Army Meteorological Report described conditions as extremely adverse for any military operations whatsoever. For the Germans, this weather was a precious gift from heaven itself. It grounded the Allied fighter bombers that had terrorized German columns since D-Day. American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs had made daylight movement suicide for German armor. Now the skies belonged to no one. Oberstleutnant von Lauchert commanded elements of the 2nd Panzer Division advancing on Bastogne. His assessment was grimly optimistic. The weather is our most powerful ally now. Without their aircraft, the Americans are just men like us. And we have many more tanks than they do. But the weather was a two-edged sword cutting both sides. German tanks struggled through mud created by alternating freeze and thaw cycles. Fuel consumption doubled as vehicles fought through the mire. Supply trucks jackknifed on roads covered with sheet ice. Wounded men froze to death before medical aid could reach their positions. Inside Bastogne's contracting perimeter, ammunition was running dangerously low. Artillery commanders were rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. Each shell had to count for maximum effect. Medical supplies were virtually exhausted after the capture of an entire medical company on December 19th. Morphine had to be reserved for only the most severe casualties. Minor wounds received no pain relief at all. Food supplies had dwindled to 1 meager meal per day. Hunger became a constant companion alongside cold and fear. Private First Class James Sims of the 101st later recalled the desperate conditions with painful clarity. We were eating snow for drinking water. My buddy next to me in the foxhole had his feet frozen solid to his boots. When the medic finally cut the boots off his toes, came away with the leather. He didn't even cry about it. He was beyond feeling anything at that point. 130 miles south of Bastogne at Verdun, a very different scene was unfolding simultaneously. In a cold, damp French barracks heated by a single pot-bellied stove, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had called an emergency conference. The date was December 19th, and the situation was desperate. The room filled with the top brass of Allied forces in Europe. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery represented British interests. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley commanded the 12th Army Group. Lieutenant General George S. Patton led the 3rd Army. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a bayonet. Major General Kenneth Strong served as Eisenhower's chief intelligence officer. He had just finished briefing the assembled commanders on the German breakthrough. His words painted a picture of potential disaster. The silence that followed was oppressive and heavy with implications. Eisenhower broke that silence with words that would define the American response to crisis. The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table. No long faces allowed here today. Patton immediately grinned with genuine enthusiasm. Hell, let's have the guts to let the sons of bitches go all the way to Paris. Then we'll really cut them off and chew them up like hamburger meat. Eisenhower's expression turned serious as he focused on the immediate problem. George, I need you to attack north toward Bastogne. How quickly can you disengage from your current offensive and pivot your entire army toward the breakthrough? What Patton said next stunned every officer in that cold French room. I can attack with 3 full divisions in 48 hours exactly. The declaration hung in the air like a physical presence. The room erupted in complete disbelief. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder actually laughed out loud. Moving an entire corps 90 degrees in winter conditions across 100 miles of icy roads in 48 hours was absolutely impossible. Eisenhower's face flushed red with anger and frustration. Don't be fatuous, George. If you try to go that early, you won't have all 3 divisions properly ready. You'll go piecemeal into battle. You'll be completely destroyed. But Patton wasn't engaging in empty boasting or wishful thinking. For 3 days, his brilliant operations officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had been warning about German buildup in the Ardennes. Patton had already prepared 3 different operational plans for exactly this contingency. Fuel dumps had been pre-positioned along potential routes north. Ammunition supplies were cached at strategic locations. Medical units had been alerted for rapid movement. I'm not being fatuous, Ike Patton replied with complete calm. I've already issued preliminary movement orders to my staff. My operations people are working on 3 possible axes of advance as we speak. All I need from you is the word to execute. He pulled out a detailed map and showed Eisenhower the carefully planned routes. I'll use Milliken's 3 Corps as the spearhead. The 4th Armored Division will lead the advance. The 26th and 80th Infantry Divisions will follow in sequence. We'll attack through Arlon and drive straight through to Bastogne. Eisenhower studied the map with growing amazement. The distance was truly staggering for such rapid movement. The weather conditions were absolutely abysmal. The roads were sheets of treacherous ice. But Bastogne had to be relieved, or 18,000 Americans would die. When can you actually start the attack, George? December 22nd morning without fail. Do it then. Make it happen. As Patton left the meeting, he immediately called his headquarters with a pre-arranged code word that would set history in motion. Play ball, he said simply. Those 2 words triggered one of the most remarkable operational maneuvers in the entire history of warfare. Within hours, 133,000 vehicles began moving north through France. The entire 3rd Army, with its 250,000 men, had to be completely reoriented. Supply dumps that had been carefully positioned for an offensive into Germany had to be relocated overnight. 20,000 miles of telephone wire had to be restrung across the French countryside. Artillery positions that had been calculated for one direction had to be completely recalculated for another. The logistics were staggering in their complexity. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division. He received his movement orders at 7 p.m. on December 19th. His unit had to move 150 miles in 19 hours through a raging blizzard. The challenge seemed impossible. We drove with blackout lights through the night, he later recalled with vivid detail. Tank commanders stood in their open turrets, freezing solid, while guiding drivers who couldn't see the road ahead. Men fell asleep, standing up from exhaustion, and had to be physically shaken awake every few minutes. The logistics were truly staggering in scope. Each Sherman tank consumed 175 gallons of fuel just for the journey to the start line. The entire division needed 50,000 gallons to reach their attack positions. Fuel trucks drove continuously through the storm. Many slid off icy roads into ditches and had to be recovered. When fuel trucks broke down completely, fuel was transferred by hand using 5-gallon jerry cans. Men formed human chains passing the heavy containers from truck to truck. Hands froze to metal surfaces in the sub-zero temperatures. Master Sergeant Frank Cursillo of the 4th Armored's Maintenance Company worked for 72 straight hours without sleep. We changed track blocks on tanks while they were still moving into position. Men's hands froze solid to the metal components. We had cases where skin came off completely when they pulled their hands away, but nobody stopped working. We all knew those paratroopers in Bastogne were counting on us to save their lives. Back in Bastogne, the situation had become genuinely critical. The defensive perimeter had shrunk to less than 16 square miles total. German artillery had zeroed in on every American strong point. Shells fell with mechanical precision every few minutes. The aid stations were overflowing with wounded men lying on stretchers in the cold. At 11:30 a.m. on December 22nd, 4 German officers approached the American lines under a white flag of truce. They were met by soldiers of F Company, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The American soldiers were suspicious and kept their weapons ready. The German delegation consisted of Major Wagner from the 47th Panzer Corps headquarters staff. Lieutenant Helmuth Henke represented the Panzer Lehr Division Operations Section. 2 enlisted men from the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment completed the party. All 4 men wore clean uniforms that contrasted sharply with the American defenders. Major Wagner carried a typed ultimatum printed on 2 sheets of official German military stationery. One copy was written in English. The other was in German. The English version had been typed on an English-language typewriter. German diacritical marks had been added carefully by hand. When brought to the American command post, the message was immediately taken to General McAuliffe. The general was catching a brief nap in the basement of the Belgian barracks that served as division headquarters. He had been awake for nearly 48 hours straight. Lieutenant Colonel Ned Moore awakened him gently and said with a slight smile, "The Germans have sent some people forward to accept our surrender, General." McAuliffe's immediate response was delivered without hesitation. "Nuts," he said simply. His staff officers gathered around as McAuliffe read the full German message aloud to the room. The document spoke of the hopeless position of the American forces in grandiose language. It warned that German artillery was ready to annihilate the USA troops completely. Only immediate surrender could save the Americans from total annihilation. Colonel Moore asked what the official response should be to the German ultimatum. McAuliffe appeared genuinely puzzled by the question. "Well, I don't know what to say to them," he admitted honestly. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard spoke up from across the room. "What you said first would be hard to beat, General." The initial response was perfect. McAuliffe laughed heartily for the first time in days. "You mean nuts?" The entire room erupted in agreement and laughter. The tension broke like a dam bursting. McAuliffe sat down at a small wooden table and penned the response that would become legendary. To the German commander. Nuts! The American commander. He signed it with a flourish. When Colonel Joseph Harper delivered the terse response to the waiting German officers, they appeared genuinely confused. Nuts? Major Wagner asked, with a puzzled expression. What does this mean exactly? Harper couldn't resist adding his own editorial comment. It means, go to hell. And I'll tell you something else for free. If you attack again, we'll kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city. Major Wagner stiffened at the insult, but maintained his military bearing. We will kill many Americans, too. This is war, after all. On your way, Bud Harper replied dismissively. And good luck to you. General Hasso von Manteuffel commanded the 5th Panzer Army directing the overall German offensive. He later admitted complete surprise that the ultimatum was even sent to the Americans. Panzer Lehr Division sent a parlementaire to Bastogne without my authorization or knowledge. The demand to surrender was refused, as was to be expected from American paratroopers. The German reaction to McAuliffe's defiant response was swift and absolutely brutal. That evening, the Luftwaffe launched its first major bombing raid on Bastogne since the siege began. For the defenders crouched in their frozen foxholes, it provided a terrifying preview of hell itself. Corporal Walter Gordon of Easy Company described the bombing raid with stark clarity. The ground shook like a massive earthquake. Trees burst into flames like giant torches. Shrapnel whizzed through the air like angry hornets seeking targets. We pressed ourselves into the frozen earth as deeply as possible and prayed to whatever gods were listening. The temperature that night plummeted to near 10 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. In the foxholes scattered along the perimeter, men took turns sleeping to prevent freezing to death. They learned to urinate in empty ration cans rather than leave the safety of their holes. Exposure for even a few minutes could mean death from sniper fire or terminal frostbite. Food had become a desperate situation, requiring creative solutions. The official daily ration was 1K ration per man. This provided about 2,800 calories when men needed at least 4,000 in the extreme cold. Soldiers learned to save the wax-coated cardboard from ration boxes. It burned long enough to heat a canteen full of snow into barely drinkable water. Technical Sergeant Donald Malarkey found an innovative solution to the protein shortage. We discovered that the dead German horses scattered around the battlefield were frozen solid like ice blocks. Fresh meat was fresh meat. We'd hack off chunks with bayonets and cook them over fires made from broken ammunition boxes. It tasted absolutely terrible, but it kept us alive when nothing else was available. December 24th brought both renewed hope and fresh horror to the besieged town of Bastogne. The weather had finally begun to clear slightly, raising hopes for aerial resupply drops. But clearer skies also enabled the Luftwaffe to launch its most devastating bombing raid of the entire siege. At 8:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, German bombers appeared over Bastogne like mechanical angels of death. Their bomb bay doors opened to release high explosive death. One bomb scored a direct hit on the aid station where René Lemaire was working tirelessly to save lives. The entire building collapsed instantly, trapping dozens of wounded soldiers and medical personnel beneath tons of rubble. Corporal Kenneth Moore was standing outside when the bomb exploded with tremendous force. I heard the explosion and immediately ran toward the building. Where the aid station had been just moments before was now only a pile of broken rubble and twisted metal. We could hear voices underneath crying for help. Men were calling for their mothers in the darkness. We clawed through frozen earth all night long. Our fingers bled from digging through ice and debris. Bodies emerged from the rubble one by one. Miss Lamour lay motionless among the wounded she had refused to abandon. The bombing had claimed 30 American lives in a single devastating strike. The Belgian nurse, who had become their beacon of hope, was gone. But Augusta Chewy survived the carnage. This Congolese-Belgian nurse worked without rest for 30 straight hours after the attack. Her hands never stopped moving. Her voice never stopped encouraging the wounded. Christmas Eve blended into Christmas Day as Patton's forces battled through howling blizzards. Snow whipped across the battlefield in sheets. Visibility dropped to mere yards. The cold bit through every layer of clothing. The offensive that started December 22nd had stalled badly. 3 full days had passed. The 4th Armored Division had crawled forward only 7 miles. Every mile cost blood. Every yard demanded sacrifice. Patton grew frustrated with traditional military thinking. On December 22nd, he summoned his chaplain. Colonel James O'Neill entered the command tent expecting routine business. The general's request stunned him. Patton wanted a prayer printed. Not just any prayer, a prayer for clear weather. The chaplain shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't typical military protocol. O'Neill expressed his doubts about such divine intervention. The general's response was swift and decisive. He didn't care what it took. Flying carpets, magic spells, divine miracles. He wanted that prayer written and distributed. The soldiers needed clear skies. They were fighting mud and snow along with German forces. God needed to pick a side. Patton's side. The prayer went to print immediately. 250,000 cards rolled off military presses. Every soldier in 3rd Army received one. The words were simple but powerful. They asked for restraint of the endless rain. They begged for fair weather to fight. December 23rd dawned with crystal clarity. Whether divine intervention or meteorological luck, the skies opened up. Sunlight broke through clouds for the first time in 7 days. The transformation was miraculous. Fog lifted like a curtain being drawn. Visibility stretched 10 full miles across the battlefield. Temperatures climbed above freezing. Ice began to crack and melt. Most importantly, aircraft could finally take to the skies. The first Pathfinder plane appeared over Bastogne at 9:50 in the morning. Colored smoke drifted down to mark drop zones. Purple and yellow markers bloomed against white snow. By 11:50, the entire sky filled with transport aircraft. 241 C-47s flew in perfect formation. Their engines created thunder that echoed across the battlefield. Sergeant Jack Agnew watched from the ground. His Pathfinder team had popped the purple smoke signal. The sound started as distant rumbling. It grew into a magnificent roar that shook the earth. The sky turned dark with aircraft wings. Agnew had never witnessed anything more beautiful. Paratroopers trapped in Bastogne erupted in wild celebration. Men climbed from frozen foxholes waving helmets overhead. Tears streamed down dirt-covered faces. They had been alone for 7 endless days. Now help filled the sky above them. Parachutes blossomed like flowers at 11:55 a.m. Supplies began raining from heaven. Ammunition bundles hit the ground with heavy thuds. Medical supplies landed with softer impacts. Food containers scattered across the snow. Blankets floated down like giant snowflakes. Artillery shells were the most precious cargo of all. The bundles totaled 1,446 separate drops. Recovery teams managed to salvage 95% of everything. Captain James Parker coordinated the frantic collection effort from his logistics post. Men sprinted through ongoing artillery fire to grab those precious bundles. He watched one private take shrapnel in the shoulder. The soldier got back up immediately. Blood streamed down his face as he dragged supplies to safety. German anti-aircraft guns hadn't remained silent. Positions around Bastogne opened fire on the slow-moving transports. The C-47s had to maintain straight and level flight at 1,000 feet. Accuracy demanded this dangerous approach. They became perfect targets. By December 26th, aircraft deliveries totaled over 1,020 tons by parachute. Gliders added another 92 tons to the supply effort. The biggest single airlift came on December 26th. 289 planes made the dangerous Bastogne run. German artillery launched their heaviest barrage yet at 2:45 Christmas morning. Shells rained down on American positions for 2 solid hours. The bombardment shook the earth. Buildings collapsed under the explosive impacts. Foxholes caved in from the concussion. At 5:30 a.m., 18 Panzer Mark IV tanks rumbled toward the western perimeter. Infantry in white winter camouflage followed behind the armor. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division was making their main assault. Lieutenant Colonel Wolfgang Mauke led the attack personally. General Kokot had given simple orders. Bastogne must fall today. Hitler himself demanded it as his Christmas present. The tanks broke through the first defensive line held by Company A of the 327th Glider Infantry. Foxholes crumbled under tank treads. Private First Class Kenneth Hendricks crouched in the second line of defense. Tank engines made the frozen ground vibrate beneath his body. Dawn light revealed the approaching German armor like mechanical monsters. Bazooka rounds bounced harmlessly off their thick steel plates. American tank destroyers had positioned themselves perfectly for this moment. M-18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion hid among the rubbled buildings. They waited until German tanks passed their concealed positions. Then they struck from the flanks. Sergeant Bill Harper commanded one of those Hellcats. His crew let the enemy armor roll past their hiding place. Then they opened fire on the thinner rear armor. Harper's gunner, Corporal Johnson, proved incredibly accurate. 5 shots fired. 3 German tanks destroyed. By 10 o'clock that morning, all 18 German tanks burned in the snow. Nearly 400 German soldiers lay dead around their destroyed vehicles. One captured German officer spoke honestly to his interrogators. The American defense had been magnificent. After this morning's failure, they knew Bastogne could never be taken. General McAuliffe issued his Christmas message to the surrounded troops. He reminded them of the German surrender demand and his famous reply. His message added that they had stopped every German attack from every direction. North, east, south, and west had all been held. December 26th at 4 p.m. brought the breakthrough moment. Lieutenant Charles Boggess commanded a Sherman tank in the 37th Tank Battalion. He peered through his periscope at the Belgian village of Assenois. The village sat just 4 miles from Bastogne's perimeter. The 4th Armored Division had fought for 4 bloody days to reach this point. Every German position had been contested. Casualties mounted with each yard gained. The final assault began at 2:20 p.m. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams ordered his battalion forward while calling for massive artillery support. He wanted every available gun firing. Within minutes, 2,340 artillery rounds were screaming toward German positions around Assenois. Boggess watched German troops fleeing their foxholes as the barrage walked through their lines. When the shelling stopped, Abrams gave the attack order. The tanks charged forward at full speed with all guns blazing. Private James Hendricks served as bow gunner in Boggess's tank. The breakthrough felt like cutting through warm butter. Germans fired from windows and doorways throughout the village. The Sherman's 75 mm main gun swung left and right, firing point-blank into buildings. At 4:50 p.m., Bogus's tank crested a small hill. American soldiers appeared ahead through the gun sight. They wore the patches of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. These were Bastogne's outer perimeter defenders. The engineers shouted welcomes to the approaching armor. They hadn't seen friendly tanks in 10 full days. Bogus radioed the breakthrough to Abrams. Contact with friendly forces was established. The siege was officially broken. The corridor cost terrible casualties to achieve. The 37th Tank Battalion lost 5 killed, 22 wounded, and 5 missing during the breakthrough. The 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion suffered 30 killed and 180 wounded. But the corridor, though only 400 yards wide, was finally open. News of the breakthrough spread through Bastogne like wildfire racing through dry grass. Men who had been conserving every bullet fired entire ammunition clips into the air. The celebration was wild and unrestrained. Wounded soldiers in aid stations cheered despite their pain. General McAuliffe maintained his characteristic calm throughout the jubilation. He simply told the relief forces that everyone was glad to see them. But for German commanders, the psychological impact was devastating beyond measure. General Major Kokot wrote honestly in his personal diary, "The relief of Bastogne represented disaster on multiple levels. Not just tactical failure, but complete moral collapse. German soldiers no longer believed victory was possible. They had witnessed American determination firsthand. That sight had broken their fighting spirit." Oberstleutnant Kaufmann from Panzer Division spoke even more bluntly about the failure. They had thrown everything available at Bastogne, their best trained troops, their last reserves of tanks and precious ammunition, all for nothing. The Americans had held their ground. When Germans demanded surrender, the defenders had laughed in their faces. That single-word reply did more damage to German morale than thousands of bombs. Nuts became a symbol of unbreakable American spirit. The original garrison had numbered approximately 18,000 men. By December 26th, casualties were mounting rapidly. The 101st Airborne Division's losses from December 19th to January 6th would total 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing in action. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division suffered approximately 500 total casualties during the siege. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 108 German armored vehicles, while losing only 17 Hellcats in return. German losses around Bastogne reached catastrophic proportions. The 26th Volks Grenadier Division suffered over 60% casualties in their failed attacks. Panzer Lehr lost 42 tanks in the fighting. The 2nd Panzer Division had bypassed Bastogne to drive toward the Meuse River. They ran out of fuel just 4 miles from their objective. The U.S. 2nd Armored Division destroyed them completely. December 27th brought even clearer weather conditions. The full might of Allied air power finally unleashed itself. From December 23rd to 27th, Allied aircraft flew over 34,000 sorties against German forces. The Luftwaffe had started the offensive with 2,000 operational aircraft. Within 1 week, fewer than 300 planes remained flyable. Flight Lieutenant Pierre Klosterman of the RAF flew Tempest fighter bombers over the battlefield. He called it tank plinking because German vehicles had no air cover protection. Allied fighters would dive from 8,000 feet, release rockets at 2,000 feet, then pull up sharply. German vehicles burned for miles across the landscape below. The most devastating air raid came on December 26th. 294 RAF Lancaster bombers attacked German positions around St. Vith. They dropped 1,140 tons of high explosives in a concentrated pattern. Every road within 3 kilometers became completely impassable. Unteroffizier Hans Behrens of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division survived that massive bombing raid. The earth erupted like volcanoes all around his position. Buildings simply disintegrated into dust and debris. Men vanished completely, vaporized by direct hits. When the bombing ended, he climbed from his shelter to find a moonscape wasteland. General McAuliffe specifically credited the 19th Tactical Air Command for their crucial support. Without their splendid cooperation, the defenders never could have held out against such overwhelming odds. Throughout the siege, something remarkable had been happening within German military ranks. A psychological transformation was taking place that Allied intelligence wouldn't fully understand until after the war ended. German soldiers had entered the offensive filled with propaganda about weak, spoiled Americans who would run at the first sign of serious combat. What they encountered at Bastogne completely shattered these comfortable illusions. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division wrote to his wife on December 24th. The letter was found on his body after he was killed. Americans were not what propaganda had promised. They fought like demons possessed. Yesterday, he had witnessed a single American machine gun crew hold off an entire German company for 3 solid hours. Major Johann Kracht of Panzer-Lehr Division was captured on December 27th during the final German attacks. His interrogation statement proved remarkable for its honesty. The Americans had won not because of superior numbers or better weapons, but because of fighting spirit. At Bastogne, Germans had learned that American soldiers were true warriors. While the defense of Bastogne captured newspaper headlines worldwide, Patton's relief operation represented something even more remarkable. It was nothing less than a revolution in operational warfare tactics. The numbers involved remain staggering even decades later. In 72 hours, Patton's Third Army had moved 250,000 men across more than 100 miles of icy winter roads. They repositioned 133,000 vehicles without a single major traffic jam developing. They laid 20,000 miles of telephone wire for communications. They established 70 new ammunition supply points throughout the sector. They created 40 fuel dumps containing 500,000 gallons of gasoline. They set up 20 field hospitals for casualties. They delivered 4,000 tons of ammunition to frontline units. They distributed 62,000 maps to guide the advance. Colonel Oscar Koch served as Patton's G2 intelligence officer. He later wrote that what Patton achieved in those 3 days should have been completely impossible. Military planners calculated it would take a minimum of 6 days just to plan such a massive movement. The secret was advance preparation. Unknown to most observers, Patton had been wargaming this exact scenario for 2 full weeks. When other generals dismissed the possibility of a major German offensive, Patton had ordered his staff to prepare detailed contingency plans for every possibility. The medical achievements during the siege deserved special recognition despite impossible conditions. Most medical supplies and personnel had been captured on December 19th, when the Germans overran rear area positions. Yet doctors and medics continued saving lives at remarkable rates. Major René Bowman served as chief surgeon for the 101st Airborne Division. He performed 167 major operations in just 10 days, many without proper anesthetic or surgical instruments. They operated by flickering candlelight when generators failed. They used cognac found in Belgian homes when morphine supplies ran out. Technical Sergeant Eugene Rowe of Easy Company treated over 200 wounded men during the siege. He often crawled through active artillery bombardments to reach wounded soldiers. He never carried a weapon into combat, only medical supplies and his courage. The successful defense of Bastogne and Patton's lightning relief operation had consequences far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Hitler's grand offensive was meant to split the Allied armies apart and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. It had been stopped completely cold. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt served as overall German commander in the West. He admitted in his post-war interrogation that Bastogne became the graveyard of the entire Ardennes offensive. Germans needed that road junction by December 18th. When Americans held for a full week, then received reinforcement, everyone knew the offensive had failed utterly. The Germans had committed their entire strategic reserve to this offensive. 25 divisions threw everything they had into the attack. In 6 weeks of fighting, they suffered between 81,000 and 98,000 casualties. They lost over 600 tanks and assault guns. They lost 1,000 irreplaceable aircraft. These were losses Germany could never hope to replace. Their reserves were exhausted. Their veteran units were shattered. Their equipment was gone. American casualties were also severe throughout the battle. Approximately 75,000 Americans were killed, wounded, or reported missing. 19,000 were killed outright. But America could replace these losses completely. By January 1945, fresh divisions were arriving from the United States at the rate of 1 per week. More importantly, the offensive had exhausted Germany's last reserves completely. When the Soviets launched their winter offensive on January 12, 1945, Germany had no strategic reserves to shift eastward. The path to Berlin lay open. The Battle of Bastogne created legends that endure to this day. McAuliffe's nuts reply entered American military folklore as the ultimate epitome of defiance under pressure. Patton's Relief March became a textbook example studied in military academies worldwide. In December 1984, veterans from both sides returned to Bastogne for the 40th anniversary commemoration. Former enemies met as friends on the same ground, where they had tried to kill each other. General McAuliffe, then 87 years old, gave the keynote speech. They had fought not for conquest, but for freedom itself. They fought not from hatred, but from duty to their comrades. When the fighting ended, they helped rebuild what war had destroyed. Former Hauptmann Hans Detmer of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division returned for the anniversary ceremony. He had come as a conqueror in 1944. He returned as a friend in 1984. The Americans they had fought showed them what democracy really meant. Not weakness, but incredible strength. Today, the Mardassan Memorial stands on a hill overlooking Bastogne. The star-shaped monument honors the 76,190 American soldiers killed in the Battle of the Bulge. Every December 16th at 5:30 a.m., the exact moment the German offensive began, memorial bells ring throughout Bastogne. In the town square stands Sherman tank Barracuda from the 11th Armored Division. Children play on it today, climbing over the same armor that liberated their grandparents decades ago. Vincent Speranza, the paratrooper who brought beer to wounded soldiers, returned many times to Bastogne before his death. The town brewery created airborne beer in his honor. At his final visit in 2019 at age 96, he raised a glass with trembling hands. He toasted the boys who didn't come home. He toasted the people who never forgot their sacrifice. He toasted freedom itself. The final statistics of the Bastogne operation remain staggering even today. American forces at Bastogne numbered 18,000 initially, including 11,840 from the 101st Airborne Division. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored contributed 40 operational tanks. Total American casualties at Bastogne reached approximately 4,500 men. German forces committed to Bastogne started at 25,000 to 30,000 troops. This eventually increased to approximately 55,000 soldiers. German casualties around Bastogne exceeded 15,000 men. They lost over 100 tanks in the fighting. Patton's relief force included 250,000 men who pivoted north. They moved 133,000 vehicles across winter terrain. They advanced over 100 miles in brutal winter conditions. The breakthrough was achieved in just 5 days. Supply operations delivered 200 tons by air alone. This required 961 C-47 transport sorties. 241 aircraft flew on December 23rd alone. The recovery rate for air-dropped supplies reached 95%. Weather data showed 168 consecutive hours below freezing. The lowest temperature reached approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility from December 19th to 22nd was less than 100 yards. Clear weather finally began December 23rd. Winston Churchill addressed Parliament in January 1945 with stirring words. This was undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the entire war. It would be regarded as an ever-famous American victory for all time. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery admitted publicly that the Americans at Bastogne wrote one of the finest chapters in all military history. Their stand would be remembered as long as men admire courage. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from former Wehrmacht General Heinrich von Luttwitz. His ex-Fünfte Panzer Corps had surrounded Bastogne completely. In 1954, visiting the memorial, he saluted and spoke with deep respect. They had been magnificent enemies who became even better friends afterward. They fought not for conquest, but for principle. That was why they deserved to win. The German forces that had mocked the Americans trapped at Bastogne learned profound lessons in those frozen December days of 1944. They learned that free men fighting for each other possess strength that no army fighting for conquest can match. They learned that determination matters infinitely more than raw numbers. They learned that when democracy faces the brink of destruction, it pushes back with force that tyranny can never hope to match. The relief of Bastogne stands as eternal proof that freedom, when truly threatened, will always find its champions. In December 1944, those champions wore the screaming eagle patch of the 101st Airborne and the triangle symbol of Patton's Third Army. They came from Iowa farms and New York tenements. They came from Texas ranches and California factories. They were America itself. On a quiet hill outside Bastogne stands a preserved foxhole, maintained exactly as it appeared in December 1944. A simple plaque beside it bears an inscription. The words were spoken by a young paratrooper whose name is lost to history, but whose spirit lives forever in the earth. They've got us surrounded, the poor bastards. That magnificent defiance embodied the spirit of Bastogne completely. That refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed absolutely certain. That was the spirit that held the line against advancing tyranny. It was the spirit that brought Patton's tanks roaring through the snow like mechanical cavalry. When the critical moment arrived, when freedom itself hung in the balance, they answered with a single word that will echo through eternity. Nuts! The German mockery died in the snow around Bastogne. It was buried beneath the thunder of Patton's advancing armor and the unconquerable spirit of surrounded paratroopers who simply refused to quit fighting. In mockery's place grew respect, then admiration, and finally lasting friendship between former enemies. The fortress of democracy had held against the storm. The arsenal of freedom had triumphed completely. In that triumph, the future of the free world was secured forever.